Hi guys! I know this is weird, but last year I used to do a lot of online videos for notes with my students, and so I thought I'd try this with you guys. We'll see how it goes. You can let me know at the end. Make sure that you're filling in the blanks for your notes as we go along with the slides. So our presentation today is all about European imperialism in Africa between 1870 to 1898, which is like the heart of when imperialism happened in Africa and European countries started colonizing different places in Africa. I got this from a different person, ENAP, so I'm crediting them there. What you're going to learn in this video is what the Scramble for Africa was and what it was like, what the Berlin Conference was and what that did in history, and the effects of European imperialism on Africa. As we go through the notes and you're filling in your blanks, please feel free to pause the video so that you can fill in your blanks and hear me talk and you're not doing it at the same time. The Scramble for Africa, if you want to pause now, you can to take down your notes, or you can pause before I flip to the next slide after I'm done talking. Either way. So the Scramble for Africa, what it was, Europeans basically raced against each other. They scrambled to colonize or to take different parts of Africa starting in the 1870s. And only 20 years later, by 1890, most of Africa was under European control. So there was a huge change in those 20 years in Africa. By 1890, we only had two countries in Africa that were completely independent, that weren't ruled by a European country. One was Ethiopia, and Italy had actually tried to take Ethiopia. It was the only African country to fight against a European country and win. And so Ethiopia beat Italy, so Italy was kind of embarrassed about that. And Liberia. Those were the only two places in Africa that remained independent or free by 1890. The major European powers that acquired or got African land included Great Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and Italy. And if we think back to our imperialist powers in the New World, we see some similarities like Great Britain, France, and Portugal. But we also see some new European countries that are starting to get in on the imperialism game, like Germany, Belgium, and Italy. And as you can see from our map over here, let me move myself so you can see a little better. Almost all of Africa was completely partitioned or spread out or divided up between European countries. A lot of France in the north, British in the south, east, and the west. Those were like our two biggest groups in Africa. The French, we kind of talked about them a little bit. They acquired a lot of the northwest Africa above the Sahara Desert in this grayish area over here, and some parts of Central Africa here as well, where it's called French Equatorial Africa. It's right by where the equator hits. King Leopold of Belgium, if we go back to our map, this is our Belgian Congo. This is the main place where King Leopold takes power. He ruled the Congo like his own private estate or his own private house, and he was very cruel. The native Africans that didn't get enough rubber from rubber trees, and I'll show you pictures of tapping rubber trees and what that looks like. People who didn't get enough of their quota, as much as they were supposed to, had their hands cut off, as you can see over here. So while the king profited a lot and got a lot of money, the people of the Congo suffered greatly, and this is one of the most cruel and brutal places in Africa to be during imperialism. The British established a lot of colonies or created a lot of colonies in Africa. They had places in Egypt and East Africa like Kenya. They also had places in West Africa like Nigeria, and then they had places in South Africa like Rhodesia, which we'll talk about, and Cape Colony, which is what is now mostly South Africa. The Berlin Conference, this is one of our big key concepts for this unit. The Berlin Conference was this meeting where Europeans came together and they made some rules about what imperialism would look like in Africa. And they did this because sometimes imperialists came into conflict or started fighting with one another because they were fighting over a different land in Africa. And so they wanted to have a meeting with all the European countries so there wouldn't be a huge war over Africa, and they could settle it just at this meeting. At the conference, the rest of Africa was divided. So Africa was completely divided up. Imperialist countries also agreed on some rules for taking Africa that they would abide by. One said no slave trade, so we're ending our slave trade. We no longer have slaves. Now we're just going to force those Africans to work for us, but they're not exactly calling it slavery, even though it was kind of similar to that idea. And the other rule was that there was no taking of land once another European country claimed it. So if I'm Britain and I claim Kenya, then Belgium and France and Germany have to stay away. They can't take it. The big thing here, too, was that there were no Africans present at the conference. So African people had absolutely no say in who took their land. It was just European countries dividing it up, kind of like our political cartoon over here, like how it was just kind of cut like a cake, basically, and the Africans had no say. Effects of imperialism. This is our last section. European imperialism had both positive and negative effects on Africa. We'll start with the positive. I know it's hard to think of some, but there are some positive effects of imperialism in Africa. One was that we had some modern technologies introduced in Africa, like transportation systems, like the railroad, which made shipping and traveling a lot easier. We also had communication systems that were brought to Africa that were more modern, like telegraphs, which is, if you know, like a Morse code. It's basically sending messages long distances very quickly, which is the first time that could happen, and telephones, which you know what those are. We also had the introduction of European medicine that helped people, obviously with sicknesses and illnesses, diseases, and it also helped to improve nutrition in Africa, which both of those things led to an increase in African population. The negative effects are more easy to think of when it comes to imperialism. First off, African people were treated very poorly in all of the colonies. They weren't treated as equals. The Europeans thought that they were a lot better than Africans were. And that's that whole idea of racism and the ideological motivation that we talked about for imperialism, how Europeans thought they were better, and that they should bring other people to civilization or like advance them so they could be like the Europeans. The second negative effect was that Europeans divided up Africa without any thought about the people who are currently there and the groups that were there. So groups that didn't get along were sometimes put in very close borders next to each other when they shouldn't have been. And this led to a lot of conflicts that unfortunately still exist today. The last thing for today is a thing for you. This is your exit ticket to leave today, and it's a good review about our notes too. So you can answer this on your blank paper in your notebook. Answer the following questions. You can rewind the video, or you can also look, it's posted on my website too, just the slides if you don't want to have to rewind. Number 1, what was the scramble for Africa? 2, why did we have the Berlin Conference? 3, what European nations gained control in Africa? I think there were 6 that I mentioned. And then what were the positive effects and what were the negative effects of imperialism on Africa? Thanks. Bye.